Sarah and Emily, yeah, I definitely see familiar names here. Hi, guys.
Thank you for joining us. So we'll make a start. I think there'll be some more people joining as we go. So hopefully you recognise some of the faces on our panel today. We're going to be talking to you about titles and whether you think they're important, whether they're important to you individually or within your company, and whether they've evolved effectively in terms of the admin and assistant profession. And this all started really because of a conversation that Laura and I were having when we first spoke some weeks ago. So I'll do quick intros and then hand over to everybody to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about what they do. So we've got Lauren Bradley from The Officials, Hen Barker from Henrietta Recruitment, and Laura Johnston from the Assistant's Handbook, and myself, Hannah Gray, from the Office Management Group. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I'll hand over to Lauren first, and she can tell you a little bit more about The Officials and what she does.
Hi, guys. I'm Lauren Bradley. Some of you, I think, definitely recognize names in here, so some of you may know who I am, but I run The Officials at jointheofficials.com, where we empower. Sorry, this is from all the webinars, my voice is going. We empower admins and assistants through community courses and coaching. I've been an assistant or an admin or an office manager and a million other past lives for over 10 years. And I'm just really focused on assistants are my people. And I know what it's like, and I know how hard it is, and what titles and why titles are so important to us, and how also at the same time they're not. It's like the weirdest thing. And it was really nice to have a conversation with Hannah about this that just kind of erupted into something else. And I'm just looking forward to having a conversation with you guys about it.
Thank you. Hen, over to you to do a quick intro.
Hi, I am Henrietta Barker. I'm a recruiter. I recruit for assistants, and I have done for a long time, over 14 years. I've been running my own business. I recruit in this space in London predominantly for quite senior roles, but usually a variety. And I think from my perspective, I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are about the importance of this. I've certainly got my own opinions from my experience working with people, but to hear everybody's own perspective is going to be really interesting for me, and I think it will really help long term. So I'm excited to do it today.
Thank you. And to Laura as well, to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, so I'm Laura. I'm also an assistant. I've been an assistant since 2012, so almost 8 years. I founded the Assistant's Handbook in February, I think, so about 3 months ago. I've just moved to Dubai, just arrived here, so whilst I'm figuring out my next career move, I decided to set up a blog. It was actually after a conversation with Lauren as well. I'm also an official, and yeah, I just kind of had the idea to try and pull together all of my kind of knowledge and resources and share as much as I can. I fully agree with Lauren that titles do and don't matter, and depending on how well your day is going kind of depends the value that you're putting on your title. But I'm really excited to kind of be here, really honoured to be on this panel, and yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Thank you. And I'm Hannah from the Office Management Group. I've been, actually my first title was branch secretary, so I had the old hat title many moons ago, and an EA, PA, and more recently for the last 15 plus years an office operations and facilities manager. So I've had various titles, which I'm sure we'll get on to discussing how suitable and how many different titles there are out there as well. So I'm equally looking forward to this chat today. So thank you once again to everybody for joining us. I'm going to kick off with a quick poll to you all, whilst I just give a bit more background about the conversation that Lauren and I had, and then subsequently that the four of us started to have in a chat. So I'm going to pop this poll out now about how important titles are to you. So if you could let us know by voting, hopefully you can see that poll just now. So yeah, Lauren and I, as I said, we spoke, I don't even know, maybe a month ago or so now. It was sometime into lockdown, and we were chatting about office management titles and assistant titles, and Lauren had shared with me that she was an office manager, which I didn't know until we spoke. So we had a lot of common ground in the career paths that we'd taken. And then Lauren sent me a link to an Instagram, I think live you did actually at the time, and it's in your IGTV now.
Yeah, I forgot that actually was what started it, isn't it?
It
was an
was,
Instagram
yeah.
live, because I had read in a chat room where someone was quite peeved, and it kind of spawned me to talk about it.
Yeah. So you sent me that video, and then I was sort of dabbling with Instagram for the first time, really, and decided to use that to do a story and a poll and play with the app's features. And we then set up a group between the four of us from that to talk about the poll. And the results that we had were 67% of people saying yes, titles mattered to them, versus 33% that said no. So it's interesting to see. I think 13 have voted. It might be the panelists actually that haven't voted as yet. So I think that's most of you that have voted. And the results are showing that 86% of you think, or say that title is important to you, 14% no, and 7% unsure. So that's really interesting. So it kind of aligns with the Instagram poll that we did. So we're really keen to discuss, why do titles matter to some people and not others? And I'm really interested to hear Henrietta's thoughts on that as well, because particularly kind of, I guess, sitting outside of it, because the three of us have been assistants, are still actively assistants, and I'm still actively an operations office manager. We have a bias, I guess. So Hen, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on that one. As to why they matter to some and not others, and keen to discuss assistant titles now. Have they evolved effectively to match actually what people do in those roles, and the impact that they have on their businesses as well? Because I think there's so much, like we were saying, weren't we, about culture and how much they drive that and are a business partner, and you know, much more than this supportive assisting role. So really keen to discuss that. Hierarchy is another thing we wanted to discuss, in terms of EA to PA to assistant to secretary, but also comparatively to office and facilities and operations manager, and how that all blends in, and how you guys see that in terms of hierarchy. And I think that's quite a personal thing as well in terms of your career and your own aspirations, but keen to hear your thoughts. Yeah, so Henrietta, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, on that one that I'm keen to understand about. Why do you think they do matter to some people and not others? And please feel free, everybody on this webinar, to use the chat and let us know your thoughts as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think it's such an interesting question. They matter and they don't matter in so many different ways. And they matter to the individual, definitely, if you are trying to get a new job and you are conscious that somebody is going to determine your career path based on the job title that you've already got. They also matter in terms of the sense that it's the ease of which you're able to determine what someone does in their current role. So for me, if you have a particular job title, I may be able to quickly understand a little bit about what you do. Only a small amount, but it can help. And I think it also matters in terms of collaboration and cooperation from other members of your team and in a business. And so if you have a particular job title, it may allow you access or faster access to people within a business if you need it. I think that from a recruitment perspective, there's a lot to unpack around titles, because most titles just don't give me enough information about what somebody can or can't do. So I think that it does and it doesn't. It doesn't really matter in smaller organisations. I think it doesn't matter if you don't mind either. I think that that's a really clear, obvious perspective. If it doesn't bother you what your title is, and that doesn't impact your feeling about your career, then that's a really important distinction. But I think that the issue that I have from job titles is that because there's no clear path for professional advancement in terms of titles, it can cause a lot of issues in the recruitment process. So from that, specifically from my perspective, I think that I'm really keen to hear what other people feel about their own job titles. I've had many, and that hasn't necessarily impacted my career path. So that's not necessarily something that I'm familiar with, but I feel that so much of our identities are tied up with our job titles on an emotional level. You see that often also with people returning to work from a career break, or, you know, that's a very difficult thing to talk about and write down what you've been doing. And I suppose that if it really feels like it's something that's important to you, then I think it really is. And the reasons behind that are personal to your own experience, the size of the business that you're working in, and the way that you're treated in that business because of that too. I think that kind of links in lots of different ways.
I think you've touched on a really good point there about the, and you know, I'm sure we can speak about it a lot on the call today in terms of hierarchy, because I've always struggled with that, particularly in the UK. And Lauren, obviously you're from the US, and I think there's a fairly different and more distinctive system out there in terms of assistant titles, certainly. But I think that's the struggle, is how do you know when you're progressing, other than perhaps salary and responsibility, if you might go from an EA role, for example, to a PA role, well, which is more senior? Because a lot of people, I think, and I might be wrong, see EA as more senior. It's got that executive title to it. And certainly that's the path that I took, as I went higher up the ladder and was working for more senior directors, MDs, etc. I suddenly got the EA title compared to the PA one. But there isn't really that clear ladder for the admin profession to be able to say, okay, well, I'm starting out as a secretary or an assistant or a junior assistant or whatever it might be. Then I'm going to a PA, then I'm going to an EA, and then I'm going to a, whatever it might be, an HNW PA, or, I'm not sure, but I think you're right. That's really difficult to see quite clearly as a whole profession. Yeah. Actually where your career path is, and what's more senior versus another. Because if you took a typical role of somebody in terms of titles, you might be, I don't know, analyst, and then it normally goes like analyst, VP, ED, MD, or director and senior director, and do you know what I mean? Those kind of typical titles that you'd see. Associate, I think, is another one somewhere in the mix, and vice president and VP. I know that's quite Americanized, but there's always that kind of really clear ladder for almost every other profession out there, I think. So Lauren, what's your take on that?
Well, I'm going to put something here in the chat, a link. So some of you may be familiar with Lynn Walder, and she's been working on this title recalibration that I was not aware of who she was till this year. This is the problem with assistants who just fall into stuff. We have huge gaps in our knowledge. And I was actually in a meeting once, an event in New York, and even though I'm in London, and I started my career in London, and I'm in London now, but I worked in New York for a while, and I was actually in a meeting where Bonnie Lowe Cramen stood up and gave away a copy of her book, and I was like, who is this lady just jumping up and giving away a copy of her book? And everyone else knew who she was but me. I was like, I don't know who she is, and because I was just so out of it. But Ebony Bellhumor shared Lynn with me, and she's working on the state side, so it's a little bit different. You got a lot of the VP title stuff in there. And then I think Lucy Brazier has been working on it quite a bit, obviously, in London and worldwide, really. There's so many things to unpack here. The reason why we originally talked, and I was telling you about this, it's now on our Instagram on IGTV, was this woman had posted that she was an EA, and she kept getting offered office management roles. And I've actually talked to Hannah about this as well. And she was quite peeved by it. That's the word I'm going to use. But she was annoyed a little bit, and it was, I think it was more that she was annoyed that she was getting offered jobs that she didn't want. But it came across as elitist, that she was an EA and above an office manager, and she clearly felt like she'd worked that hard. And I actually know her. She follows me. We've talked before, and the way I talked about it, she said that perfectly captured what I was saying. Because I actually felt what she felt, because it was one, having that good relationship with a recruitment or a recruiter is really important, and someone that actually knows what they're looking for. The other issue is being digitally desirable and searchable. Like now we all have to be SEO searchable. So having I'm sure, Hen, you must go on LinkedIn and start with executive assistant if they've told you what the title is, and then you're digging into their profiles to figure out, are they really the right person I'm looking for? But it does start with that job title, right? And so there's a whole bunch of things to unpack here, but if we start with hierarchy, I worked at Drama Fever, which was a media company, a streaming media company in New York, and we were purchased by Warner Brothers, and it was amazing. It was a startup that made it, and I was the office manager there. I was the only admin. I ended up hiring the only other admin I'd ever worked with up to that point, which became the office manager in the Philly office. So then I had to become office manager team lead, because to get a raise with Warner Brothers, I had to have a title change. And I was like, I don't want a title change. I'm the office manager, which to me meant it actually was the most impactful job I've had, even when I've been the EA to the youngest female CEO of a £100 million company in the UK, because I touched everybody. I was in charge of culture keeping, culture curating, all of the budget for any suppliers that we had, the massive office moves that we did. And I just had more clout in that role, even though as an EA, I also became the acting COO, but I felt like I was more impactful and more comfortable in that office management role. And it just happened to be what my title was, office manager, though I was really I was much more than that. The roles that I was in or what I was responsible for was so much more than that. And I have talked with companies that actually separate their admins, which I was consider an office manager role to be in, from their assistants, and they don't have them meet together. They actually don't. I actually know a very big company that you all know of that doesn't mingle the two or consider it a trajectory for their career. They're working on a framework right now to build this out for their company, but it's very muddy. But I think it really comes down to, like, I actually feel comfortable with everyone I've ever worked with that I will just change my job title. Like, I'll just change what it was on my LinkedIn, because if I'm looking for, or on my CV, and I know they'd back me up, and that's really, I guess, what you're looking for. You're looking for that relationship, and it really comes from you being intentional. Don't wait for someone to find you. Make sure that you know what you want, you know the kind of titles are out there, and make yourself digitally desirable. And there's a book called The Third Door, and it's basically about, like, how do you go around, how do you find that back door into that company, and make connections that's really going to get you further along, and because I've always been in the place I've wanted to be. I've always been in the title I've wanted to be at that time, or it was always fine. And my role was always what I wanted it to be. And that was by design, by me. I didn't realize it, but I realized how much I see other assistants that I talk to that wait. They're waiting for a recruiter to contact them. They're waiting for, and I'm like, why? Or they've gone into a pool with Hen and I had a really great conversation about, like, I went into a pool of, they met with the recruiter, they finally got to meet with the recruiter, and then they go into a pool and they never hear from them again. And it's like, okay, that system's a bit broken, but you're there to be a pool. They only remember the last person they met because they meet so many people. It's totally reasonable. So you have to make those things happen for yourself, and that involves the respect that you get in the office, and make sure that you are a part of that narrative, that you are claiming the respect that you deserve. And so it's a very complicated, let me just put it this way, it's a very complex issue. I have many thoughts about it. I'm going to let other people talk, but it is, I think hierarchy is what you make it, essentially.
I mean, I've certainly adjusted my title on CVs before, particularly when I was at JP Morgan, because I had such a massive title, to make it much clearer, and it changed over time as well, to make it much clearer, someone looking at it to go, oh, okay, she was an office manager, because that's essentially what I was doing, and that's how I would sum it up. But we've got a couple of comments I just want to read out. So Lucy said, for me, it's about hierarchy, and I have a junior working under me, but we both have the same job title. So no one outside of her team sees a difference in what we do, although clearly there is, because you manage her, I assume, Lucy, there as well. So that's quite incredible. Laura, what do you think of that that particular comment from Lucy? And have you been in that situation?
I have and I haven't. So in the company that I was working in before I moved to Dubai, when I first joined, it was just me. I took over from the outgoing OM, and the company was growing from like 25 people up to, there was 100 people when I left. And my role changed. And so after about a year and a half there, I was given the opportunity to become a manager, which I'd never done before and was frankly terrified about doing, because I was like, but I control everything and I like knowing everything that's going on. So how do I make it okay in my head to let go enough to let someone else kind of look after it? And so when my team member came on, and she was amazing, we had quite a frank discussion about how we were going to differentiate between my role and her role, so that she had enough respect within the company, or that she could garner enough respect in the company to kind of go around and start making decisions. Because I know that I've had to work really hard for it, because I was filling quite big shoes, and I didn't want it to be hard for her to come in and people not want to speak to her because they were used to speaking to me. So we decided that her role would be office assistant, and with the understanding that all the day-to-day stuff she would be doing, and then my role would stay EA/office manager, depending on who it was that I was speaking to and what it was that I was looking to accomplish. Having that very slight distinction made a big difference, but it also meant that if it was a bigger decision to make, even if I totally empowered her to make the decision, people would still come to me and ask. And that's a really difficult line to tread, because she obviously didn't want to make decisions without me, but I wanted her to feel empowered too. And then when you've got the rest of the company not wanting to speak to her, trying to kind of navigate that is really hard.
And do you think that's because, do you think that's because of the assistant attachment to that title, or do you think there was something else that was causing that?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's people tend to get used to always speaking to one person about something. And so when you suddenly change the process and say, oh no, actually, I'm going to step away from this because my EA role is now too big, and as much as I love being OM as well, the day-to-day stuff I can't do anymore. To try and explain that makes it quite difficult. And also when people get used to kind of the process, and also people get used to your way of doing things. And so to suddenly say, these were my suppliers, but if you want to change suppliers, I'm more than happy for you to do that, but the team aren't happy. There's then kind of the conversation to go back and say, yes, but we need to move forward as a company, and so we have to make those those tough decisions. When it comes to hierarchy, in a previous role I've had it where there was both myself as EA and one of the project managers, and the way that it had previously been structured, there was a dotted line from her into me, but then on a project that we were given, it's a project that I'd previously owned, but when she joined, assumed that she would be taking it over, but it hadn't been made clear to either of us who was going to be owning it. And so there was just a massive clash, because through no fault of our own, we both kind of went off and worked on it. And so that's really difficult to then try and understand, well, how do we unpick this, and how do we make sure that even though we have differing titles, our responsibilities are quite similar as well. So yeah, it's just, as Lauren was saying, it's a mess, because you end up with a really kind of arbitrary hierarchy which doesn't really serve anyone, and it just makes for kind of competition within teams that doesn't really need to be there. I guess it comes down to communication as well.
Exactly, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think you've touched on a really good point, because a lot of titles, you see a job spec, I'm sure, Hen, and it's one of the questions I want to ask you actually, is about putting them together. And you see a job spec, and I think more than the title's almost like the picture, right? The title's the thing that pulls you in and attracts you to it, and vice versa. Someone's title is what might attract a recruiter or a company to that individual, because they're looking to sort of shoehorn them into what they're looking for. So if they're looking for an executive assistant, they'll be looking for someone that's had that title previously. But I think that's a really good point that you've touched on as well there, that communication is so key. But if that's not directed from someone that sits above admins, assistants, office managers, whatever it might be, particularly where perhaps your roles are so similar, and also if the job spec isn't accurate or isn't updated regularly as well, because I think it's an ongoing thing, your job spec. And my advice to everybody, I don't know if particularly Hen would agree, but my advice to everybody is always make sure your job spec is up to date. If you were given one when you started at that company, ask for the Word document version of it and just see if it's still relevant, and update it every year or every 6 months to be in line with your appraisal and your objectives, and your CV matches to it and all that kind of, it's a good box to tick. But I think that's certainly what gets me excited about a role, is not just the title, but actually the content of that role and what's in it. And I think if that's not defined well to start with, that's something that you need to communicate. Lucy, I'd be really interested to know what your titles actually are, if you're happy to share that. And if you've ever approached your company to see if there's a way, or if you've suggested any way to distinguish between the two of you, and perhaps put manager at the end of yours. Like Lauren said, she had office manager, team manager, I think you said, or team lead, wasn't it? Team lead. A mouthful. But Jessica, you've said, yeah, of course, definitely, please do comment, and you totally agree. And as the result of a title, you felt with esteemed or and included or slightly demoted. So, okay, so I think what you're saying is where the title perhaps doesn't fit as a result of the incorrect title for you personally, it's left you feeling low in your self-esteem and less included or demoted, which I think, again, is a personal thing, and it can really affect how you work, I think, can't it? And your motivation for that job. So thank you for that comment. I think a lot of people probably agree there.
I think
Emily, go on,
I was going
sorry.
to say on that is I think sometimes it's the intention that the person has that changes your title. You can tell. It doesn't so much matter the title. Sometimes it depends. Like if you're an EA and you get knocked down to, or they tell you you're going to be administrative assistant, I think that's more appropriate. That can cut, especially us who want to be nothing but helpful. It hurts when you feel like you're feeling unappreciated, and we don't need much to feel appreciated. We just need a genuine thank you, and that's it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes it's the intention behind it, where you're just like, you just don't get it. You just don't understand what I do, and I think that's where it really cuts, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's that frustration, isn't it? And that also then builds on a lack of empathy for your role when you're struggling, when you need that extra support, when you're stressed, when you're off sick and no one understands that actually by you not being there and no one else taking over from you, that it builds on your responsibilities when you come back. You can't handle it, it's a massive piece. So Emily, you've said that you worked as an EA, with an EA who also had office management within her role, but does not like to be introduced as being office manager. That's really interesting. You've worked as an EAPA and office manager, and proud to have all the roles. Being an office manager is a great role, and you're involved in so many areas of the business. Yeah, I agree. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts on that one?
I 100% agree with that. I've always been everything and done everything, and
Can you make that your title?
Yeah, you can
everything.
Everything.
I'm everything. There we go. We solved the problem.
I am in my previous company. I was called the Oracle because I knew everything, and I was also called the headmaster or headmistress because I wasn't scared of some of the BD team weren't necessarily the most politically correct, let's say, about things, and I was, of everyone in the company, I was not scared to basically turn around and be like, you realize you can't say that, and they would listen purely because I think I'd garnered enough respect in the company to be able to turn around and say that. And yes, I was reporting directly into the co-founders, and so there is the job title that meant that I could get away with saying it. And when I think of my my co-worker, my team member, she would never have been able to get away with saying that because either the respect wasn't there, or because the job title wasn't there she didn't have the respect automatically plugged in, which is a very strange kind of situation to find yourself in. Because
it may have also been you and the way you present yourself, because I think that's a thing, you know, if you've got a different quality and a different way of saying things, I think it has an impact on that as well, personally, not just the other things. I agree, it probably was the other stuff as well, but yeah, you've probably got a wonderful quality and nature about you where you could get away with being headmistress, as it were. I love that. I just that made me think of titles that, or names that I was called as office manager and things, and I once had the laminator because I used to put so many signs up and laminate them. I kid you not, they and the CEO, Martin, he pulled me aside at the Christmas party once. He was quite drunk and he said, "Do you know we call you the laminator?" And oh no, actually they said it whilst they were presenting, and they said the laminator over here, and I was like, what? And then he said to me afterwards, "Do you know we call you the laminator?" Mortified.
Oh, I love that though. But I agree with you. I bet you if Laura was in the opposite position, if you had been the junior, you still would have been headmistress.
Essentially.
Because you garner that, you make that, there's something about you and about that backbone that you have that you don't contribute to the narrative that you are less and others are more. We're all more together instead of, so I think that's just something about you that radiates from you no matter what your role would be.
Lauren will know the LinkedIn post that I'm about to mention, but there was a LinkedIn post that came up.
I just blogged about it this morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That came up a couple of weeks ago, and it was this guy who basically went on LinkedIn and was talking about how he'd never had an EA, but was potentially going to have an EA. And I read it in a very unsympathetic. I was foisted upon the EA. I thought that I was being kind of told that no one wanted to talk to me. I don't like the term assistant because I find it really demeaning. I instead want a productivity partner. Productivity partner puts my hackles up. I just don't like that. I have like an emotional reaction to that term. But I actually read the whole article or post out to my boyfriend, who's a CTO. I was like, what do you think about this? Like, tell me. And his reaction was, he's just asking for advice. I don't see anything in there that's negative towards an EA. I just see someone who's trying to learn. And his take on it was, I think you're too close and you've had too many people disregard you for your title before to be able to see that he's actually asking for advice as opposed to being derogatory. I think Lauren takes a different view to it, but it was such an interesting article and it kind of garnered so much commentary and attention and really strong emotional reactions as well.
I think that was actually his point. I think it was clickbaiting us.
Yeah. He succeeded.
Because if you look at his, but you know what, he's really good. I was like, damn, he's pretty smart. I think he is actually hiring an EA, but I think he knew it was going to be a hot topic. And then he didn't comment to any of us. He didn't reply to anyone. And I see him comment on other posts that he's put up. But basically he was saying that when he was ever passed to an assistant before, he literally said he rolled his eyes, or I think he said, yeah, I rolled my eyes. And I think that was the part that got people's hackles up. Because when I first read it, I thought, this is a guy that doesn't get it. And he's going to flounder. He was already saying, like, I have a hard time. My schedule's so crazy. I don't know how to hand this off. Does anyone have advice? And I think I went in with what I did not realize was going to be quite a resonating comment, because the comment got 100. I think it's the most like thing I've ever done. It was just a comment under somebody else's post. And I just basically said, okay, if you're worried that you can't pass off your workflow, then hire gold, hire someone good. And I'm sure Hen can back that up, which is if someone is a hard case or is not as unfamiliar, then hire an assistant that's going to onboard themselves and onboard you like a client and say, okay, we need this information from you. And then I also said to give them a training budget, for God's sakes. And that really, like, people screenshotted it, said, I'm screenshotting this. They posted about it themselves. They shared it. I could not believe that, because I just was really speaking to him. And I didn't realize how much. I think there were like 35 comments and 119 likes on just what I said. And I didn't feel like I had said anything really nothing that we wouldn't all agree with, right? And I guess that's the point. But it was just a touch of arrogance in it. I think you're right, Laura, that it was that we have been just an assistant. We all know that, just an assistant stuff. But then I think there's so many advocates in our field, like Hen, who, you know what, this is freaking me out because I feel like I want to pass Post-its to you from our video. I want to like throw a highlighter to Hannah. I don't know, has anyone seen our video? Raise your hand if you've seen our Pass the Love video on any of our channels. But this is so weird. I feel like we could like, if we were all lined up right. But
water and yeah.
but I feel like Hen is, you've been so sweet. You've been so nice, saying like, thank you so much for like embracing me. And it's like, well, you're like, what is it? Embrace. You're in with us. You know, you're one of our advocates. You're one of our great people. So I'd like to hear, what does it feel like when you deal with executives or principals that, like, you must place people and think, oh, he's going to be, or she's going to be a nightmare or something to like work for. What is that like for you, I wonder?
In terms of placing people into those kind of roles?
Or yeah, like when you're, I guess when you're working with those type of people and you're trying to, I mean, are you trying to, like, how do you match someone? Have you ever worked with someone who you feel doesn't quite get what the role is and just wants them to be a secretary?
A lot. I went through a period of recruiting for startup hedge funds, and a lot of startup businesses were told to contact me to find out what somebody could do for them, because they had no idea. If someone's been in a larger organization and they've had assistants recruited for them and they've maybe had very little involvement in that recruitment process, then they just have no idea of what the capabilities somebody has. So I would do a lot of dual roles, EA and OM, but really those roles would evolve into kind of junior COO roles. I mean, they were really interesting roles, not only from a perspective of what someone was actually doing in that job and the variety. Sometimes they go in before, there was an office, there wasn't anything in place, no structure. They'd be able to assess the situation and essentially build a business around the team, build a structure, put the processes in place, get the office, get all the furniture in, manage this business while other people were fundraising. And where that showed me what people's perception of roles were, it led me to work a lot on job specs and job titles with teams. But essentially, I think it was an educational issue that people just weren't aware of what the possibilities were for them. I think their perception was a lot of the time that they were going to get someone in to do some diary and sort of organise them a little bit. But what they didn't realise was the value that someone was going to bring to their business. It was incredible. And a lot of those hires that I did at that point, their roles have developed and changed so much, and they've just catapulted into different areas of business. It gave them a real platform in many cases. So I think businesses need to be educated about what somebody's doing. From my perspective, we also haven't talked about a salary yet, so I was hoping we'd talk about that later too, because I think that's there's a lot of difficulties from my perspective that salary is a big indicator in lots of cases as well. So I'd be interested to talk about that.
Okay, I'm just going to read some of these comments. I love these names. Pretty was called the Office Mummy, and Lauren, was it Lauren? You also had Drama Mama and Drama.
It was called Drama Fever, and I was the oldest person there at like 33.
Hey! Sorry, you might be able to hear Noah screaming in a minute, having his lunch and getting excited. So, Lucy, I think you came back and said that you're both team assistants, but you use investor relations assistant on your email signature. But interestingly, they've recently hired PA and EA positions and haven't changed your role. I mean, Lauren, I know, and probably Hen as well, can give you some advice on how to approach that with your manager if you wanted to, offline. Give you some advice on how to go about addressing that, because that would get my back up. And I think would probably get your back up as well, right, Lauren and Laura, I would imagine.
Yeah.
If you were genuinely more senior than someone, you had the same title, they said we're not having a structure, and then started to hire positions that were clearly, in my view, given, you know, if you're team assistant, to me, like I started off as a, say, branch secretary, which is probably team assistant these days, and then I was like a team PA, and then I was an EA, so that was my route. And for me, that makes me feel like team assistant or PA. When it's a team, it's slightly more junior, and then when you go to like one-to-one roles, that's when you're more senior, because you're then, you know, looking after the CEO or COO or CTO or whatever it might be, and everyone will have a different perspective on that. But I think yeah, that seems to be the route that this company's taken, and therefore those titles are more senior. So yeah, hopefully, I think Lauren and Hen, you're probably okay to give some advice there, aren't you? If you want it, Lucy, you can reach out.
I think, going back to just the part about job titles and making sure someone else had a different job title than me, so they know that they reported to me. I actually gave the person I hired the same job title as me, and I didn't want another job title, but everybody knew in the company that, and that's how I got team lead, because we got acquired and I had to do something to be able to justify a role. And actually the HR person, I was like, I don't care, whatever you want to do is fine with me. I know who I am, I know what I do, and everyone else does here. And I think it was, again, it's just contributing to that narrative and making sure that you're direct on it. And I gave her that title because I knew she was doing that. She was doing that in another office, even though I knew she reported to me and I was mentoring her.
Have we lost, is it just me that's lost
Yeah,
sound?
no.
Yeah, lost your
Lauren,
sound.
Oh, sorry, there we go. It suddenly flicked over to mute. But I think what my thing was that, and I think Laura knows this because she just did a course for us because she's amazing, is that I believe of pulling everyone up from within. And I almost give people titles I expect them to rise to, much like, I end up talking about this all the time, but much like men who go in and say, I get the job title and then I'll prove myself. Women go, I'll prove myself and then try and get the job title and then surprise when we don't get it. And so because of conditioning, and we think, I literally was talking to someone the other day who was going in for a role, and she was going to ask for, she goes, well, what do you think I should ask for? We had a really great meeting. We haven't talked about salary. At the end, they were like, well, why don't you send me an email with what you expect? And it was a part-time private PA role. And she goes, what would you go in at? She hadn't done anything. She was like in a newer role. And I said, I go in at 25 an hour. And she was like, oh, I was going to go in at 15. I was like, I'm going to slap that 15 out of your hand. I was like, go in at 25 and see what happens. They already love you. They'll just negotiate with you. And she really didn't want to. She goes, you know what? I'm going to work on it. I'm going to prove myself. And in 6 months' time, I'll ask for an adjustment. I said, how good are you at asking for a raise? And I literally am going to blog about this as well, because I have written down her text message back to me, which is, busted. I suck at this. I'm no good at this. And she went in and she asked for it, and that's what she got. So she was newer in the role. So I know I depending on who it was, I would have advised differently, but she was like, I feel amazing when she wrote back, because she was going to ask for 10 pounds less an hour. I could not believe that. And then when she got it, she was so surprised. But we have to go through those times of asking for things and getting a positive outcome. And I think that's why things like this are really important, to get that backbone, to get that when we're all, again, because most of us are women, we're kind of conditioned to be not problems, but problem solvers, take care of everybody else, constrict ourselves, be less so others can be more, when it's really, if we're all more together. And it's really just finding that tone within yourself. Think about what you talk about that you're really good at. You just have authority talking about it, whether it's a video game or something. Then you just got to take that voice and put it over here, repackage it, and you'll get so much more. And so I really encourage everybody here to kind of do that. And then the other thing about that was just that I knew someone, I interviewed for a job once, and I was going to be the EA to the head of marketing. And I interviewed with the EA to the CEO, who kept calling himself chief of staff. And I looked at his LinkedIn, and it just said chief of staff, no description in all the companies he worked at. And I was like, that's really weird, because it's kind of a newer title and not many people have it. And I talked to them, and they kept calling him the EA. And I was like, oh no, he was so allergic to the title. So I think some people are talking about allergic to this office manager title. They're kind of we've had some comments come into the panelists about that. And it really talks more about them than it talks about that role or what they're looking for. So again, it all comes from within. It really does. And if you're working for someone that doesn't appreciate you, talk to Hen. You know what I mean? Like there's possibilities to move, and I know everything's a little bit crazy time now, but get intentional about where you want to be and what you want.
Yeah, and I think also, can I just say, I think from my perspective, I think, you know, of course titles matter overall, and as I said earlier, in lots of different ways, but I do want to reassure you that when you send your CV to someone, or we're looking on LinkedIn, we aren't just guided by that. It isn't the deciding factor. And I think that's a really important distinction for people. If it doesn't feel right in terms of your role, I completely respect that, because that's an individual choice. But I don't want people to feel that it will hinder their progress. If you talk about what you can do and what you do in your role and your achievements on your CV, it will really help distinguish you from other people. There's a lot of crossover in terms of job titles, and so we are looking at the body of your CV more than you think. And if you can talk about your achievements and your successes in a role and what you bring to something, rather than just a list of what you do, it just makes all the difference about how attractive your CV looks and the chances of people talking to you about roles that are, you know, what are deemed perhaps as a higher job title than you've already got. So don't worry about it too much long term. If it's an issue in terms of in your company structure and organization, then I respect that. But coming from my perspective, don't worry.
Yeah, I think that I fully agree. Having recruited a lot of people in my time, receptionist, office managers, assistants, and so on, I fully agree. I think it's making sure that, you know, just below that title is that first 2 or 3 key things that you have done, you've achieved, you do for that company. And I'm going to put another poll up now, just a couple of questions to everybody, a bit more about you and your experience. And the second question is one that I want to just pick up on before we run out of time, and we may go over, so feel free to stay on if you want to and you can. But this is about the industry titles. So one of the things we were talking about, and I spoke about at the beginning, was the relevance of executive assistant, personal assistant, private PA, assistant, secretary, administrator. I think Sarah, you've said, or Sarah, sorry, have said about you used to be administrative employees, but recently renamed to management assistants. So what do you think of the relevance of these roles? So we were saying, you know, I was saying as an executive assistant is generally in companies I've been in is when I start to work for like 1 or 2 individuals who are the MD, the CEO, the COO, the senior directors, stakeholders, chairpersons, whatever of the company. So what's your thoughts, Laura, on that?
With the relevance of the job titles, I think
yeah.
So I remember when I first started, when I left uni, I was a PA, and I was doing it was kind of split 50-50 between doing business admin and also more personal admin. So running and collecting kids, running and doing errands and things like that. And then as I became more kind of used to working within the company, my role shifted and became maybe 30% personal and then 70% business. And I also felt that I was due a pay rise because I'd kind of achieved all my goals or all of my OKRs for that year. And the only way that I could kind of couch it and demonstrate why I needed the pay rise and why I wanted the job change was to basically list out everything that I used to do and then everything that I was now doing, and demonstrate that it wasn't really a PA role anymore. It was more of an exec role. And so that's kind of when I made the shift. And it can become really confusing when I look at, say, my job description and what it is that I do, and then I see a role, especially in Dubai, for an EA, and it only has the very small, we want you to do travel, we want you to do calendar, we want you to do email. And I'm like, but what about the culture stuff and the employee engagement stuff and all the things that I find really interesting. Like, oh no, but if you want to do that, you can't be EA. You have to be something else because an EA doesn't do that. I was like, but that makes literally no sense to me. And so it does become confusing. And when you've become used to having a job title and it encompassing all of your skills and all of your role, kind of everything that you've been doing, to then move into a different company where they attach something slightly different to the title, means that either you have to completely shift your mindset as to what your role is, or you need to encourage the company to shift their mindset. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, it's much easier for you to kind of say, oh, I'll just park that for the time being, and hopefully in 6 months I can revisit it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
it's just difficult, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, it was one of the conversations Lauren and I were having, and I think we started having the group where, when we started to think of doing this discussion, is I worked at JP Morgan. So I think, Dana, you've referred to working for a US company and struggling to get them to understand European titles and the change there. And I think Lauren's jumped in and said she'll help you fight your battle if you want. And you can tell she will. But I actually quite liked it. There was a bit more of a hierarchy there, and they had this sort of senior assistant structure and pay rise that came with that if you got so far. And I think it was not just down to who you worked for, but also the length of time you'd served there, and so on and so forth. But that wasn't known to everybody through your title. It was only that you would be part of this squad where you would go for lunches and you would have these meetings between you. And it's a very small group of assistants that got to that level. And I can't even remember the name of it now, but I felt that having assistant as your main title when you went in, and then if you worked for a team, you were team assistant. If you then went up to work for, like I worked for the CEO and COO of the EMEA branches as kind of a backup person to them. So I had more like a PA or an EA role. I can't remember which it was. So I think it made sense there, but I think in the UK personally, it's really blurred. Like the example I gave where I was a team PA, I looked after 12 people. I was not a PA to any of them in terms of doing anything personal. I was booking their travel, I was doing their diary management, I was arranging lunches and events and so on. And it was a great job. And I absolutely loved it. But I certainly wouldn't, now looking back, have considered myself a team PA. I'd have generalized it as team assistant more so. I was assisting all of them in more or less the same way. And I also looked after the director within that. So if anything, I was a PA, or actually probably more specifically an EA to her, because again, I didn't do anything personally. And then when I went to RBS, I was an EA, one-on-one. I had the office management role tagged into it. But I started to do personal stuff. Like I was collecting dry cleaning, I was picking up Rolex watches, and all the crazy stuff where you can live through someone else's life, going into these wonderful shops, pressing the bell like, hi, I'm here to pick up this £5,000 watch, please. That was the PA bit, but I was an EA. So I found it really confusing. And I think in the US, personally for me, they've got it better. And it's that hierarchy I was talking about at the beginning and Hen mentioned. It's much easier to see that career track, like, okay, well, I'm starting out as assistant and I want to get to PA to be, working with someone that's a high net worth client or a celebrity, or an EA, which would perhaps be more in a corporate environment. What do you guys think of that? And just quickly before I do hand over, let's read out the results actually, because I think everyone's more or less voted. So the length in roles varies a bit, but mostly people have been doing it for 10 plus years, which is great. And yeah, 57% of you find titles confusing, 29% no, and 14% unsure. So there's a couple of you unsure there. And everybody, pretty much 67% of you think that title change should constitute an increase in salary. And I know, Hen, you wanted to talk about that. A couple of you are a no there, and a few of you, 20%, are unsure. So yeah, varied responses, but it seems like you agree that these titles are confusing. So with all of that, I don't know, Hen, if you want to jump in here and we come to you first to see what you think of the relevance of those roles, and do they really match what you're doing now?
I don't think they do anymore. I think that when I started recruiting, to show my age, we did we had like junior secretaries and audio secretaries, and then the highest level at that point was a PA. And things have changed a lot, and for the better, because I think people deserve the recognition for their role and the evolution of the role as a whole, and the style of the role has changed so much in so many organizations. But I don't think that they represent what people are really doing in a business, because I could have an EA CV that is just not the same as somebody else's, and I'm not going to criticize either one for their experience, their work, their style. Both are relevant, but it's difficult unless you really start to investigate what someone's been doing to really understand what their role's like. That's not just because of the job title, it's also because of the businesses and the business styles. And companies like to have certain job titles. They often dictate the kind of job titles that they're using for their own benefit. It works for them to have certain job titles too. So it's a variety of factors, but I don't think they necessarily give me as much information as I would like, or clarity perhaps is maybe a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up on some of the chat here as well. I fully agree with what's being said here about this management assistant title. I think it was it Des that mentioned that initially?
She was Sarah.
Sarah, yeah, sorry. I agree. I think that's a really, it's putting management in there, because you effectively are managing up, you're managing all sorts of stuff, particularly if you've got that office manager hat as well. So it covers that area. But I think you're right, it's a very powerful title. Hen, do you think that's more clear if you saw management assistant? It probably gives some sort of hierarchy there. So if you went from assistant to management assistant, and there might be something in between where you're sort of senior assistant, following that same route that we talked about, where you're like associate, senior associate. What do you think of that?
Definitely. I think my sister's an executive assistant, and she has an assistant too, I think now. And I think having some clarity would be brilliant. I really like management assistant. I think it's representative of what people are doing. And I hope that that we can get some kind of clarity going forward. I think that it's our responsibility within the industry to make the changes to see that happen.
Okay, and salaries. Hen, I'm going to go to you to talk, because Lauren can't wait for you to talk about it, even can I. Salaries, I mean, they are so varied. You can see, I started out branch secretary on I think it was £10,500, but we're going back almost 20 years now. You do see such a difference, and you could be a private PA or an executive assistant in a corporate company, and you could be on 150,000. And again, how do you know how to get there if the titles don't match up and marry up with the salary? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a really difficult one to answer, because there's no clear path to being able to doing that. You have to look at roles really carefully, or land on your feet in terms of being offered a role that is perhaps an entry role into a startup, and then get more involved and travel in that journey with that business. But I think that salaries, I wish there was something that I could say that would make that better. It depends on the business so much. And, I think that recruiters have not helped on very many issues because of the way that recruitment has been set up. As a business model, I think it has hindered people's ability to command larger salaries. You are effectively dictated to by the recruiter who's working on that job and working for their client. So I think that has caused, over the years, a cumulative effect that's negative in certain areas, because it can limit what you're capable of asking for based on someone else's opinion of what you can do and what their clients want you to be able to do too.
I fully agree with Hen. We've had a separate conversation about salary as well, and one of the things that I find so frustrating is when you go in as a PA, I know in my experience, it was fresh out of university, and so I didn't have the experience of being able to negotiate, because you're not taught that, and you're kind of like, oh, it's my first job, I'm grateful to have whatever salary it is that I have. And then what I found is you kind of go up in increments of £2,000, which sounds like a lot of money. And then when you break it down, and like I have my student loan to pay off, and then you've got your NI and all of that, and you're like, oh, £2,000, that's not a lot of money. And then you go up, and then suddenly one day you tip into a different salary range, and then suddenly the 10% increase becomes a much larger increase. But to have the balls, I guess, to go into a meeting and say, right, I need to have this conversation with you, and I need this salary because of X, Y, Z, is really difficult. It's also really difficult. In previous companies, I've done the payroll, so I've seen the salaries, to know that I have so much more responsibility, and that if I screw up in my job, either someone's not going to get paid, or we're going to lose the office, or this or that. And then I look at a new joiner coming in doing a different role, earning 10 grand more than I am, and it's so soul destroying. But then it feeds back to the, oh, but you're just the assistant, so you shouldn't be commanding that much. Lauren's smiling. I think Lauren agrees. I think Lauren agrees with me, but it's just so difficult. And also we're conditioned, I think, as women to just be like, oh, well, I'm grateful, thank you, for that amount of money.
Yeah, just before Lauren talked, there was a comment, and I think actually I'm not sure if it was a guy or a girl, Alex, I feel like it was a male that made this comment, and he said, I think titles need to change, that's for sure. Gone are the days of tea and typing. And is it typically, like you say, this sort of, you know, servant style service that we were, you know, the tea makers? I know when I did work experience, and first went into the branch secretary role, they were like, and you make a good cup of tea, and I was like, I absolutely cannot, because I don't drink stuff. I've never made one, so you're gonna have to show me. And I was so shocked that was like one of the first questions I was asked. Was it because I was a young girl, a woman, you know, a young woman, or was that genuinely the need of the role? So yeah, and I think picking up on what you've said, it's, yeah, Lauren, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on it.
So I know Alex. He's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he said he kind of started out because I think he was at university, he used to work in like admin at university, like at the student center or whatever. And he used to have to work a lot with like the executive assistant. He would be in meetings where the executive assistant to higher up at the higher ed was there. And he was like, she's just a machine. And he was so in awe of her. And he was like, I want to do that. And I was like, yes. So I was like, yeah. I was like, yes, that's fantastic. And so, and he's fabulous. And he gets it. He totally gets it. And I love him. What he was saying is totally right. Even though he's never actually been subjected to that too much, he knows. And I know he has been subjected to sort of being considered an assistant in some ways as well, though. You know, just an assistant. That's a silly, crazy term. You missed, Laura, when you were talking, you said balls, and I was like, she means ovaries. I was like, sorry. No, and I shouldn't even say that. It's not ovaries. It's no. I shouldn't say that even.
And you shouldn't say boobs either, because that's just like a whole nother.
You know? But
guts.
I thought it was interesting. Oh, what was I just going to say? It was interesting. Oh, it came up about being a PA, which is very confusing. And this idea of like the US paying more than the UK, which has come up in the chat. Yeah. So I will be 100% honest. When I worked at Drama Fever as an office manager in New York City, I made $82,000 a year. And I was like, holy hell, as an office manager. My job was great. I could tell you I was never really overworked. We had unlimited paid time off. Like we had a calendar where you had to put your time off, but you didn't need, but nobody tracked it. It was just to know that like if the building was on fire, we knew where everybody was, right? It was a wonderful place to work. And I was barely paying my bills because New York's like council tax is like $1,000 a month. It was insanity. But it really helped. That number, even though it was very hard to make ends meet with a kid in daycare, which was a mortgage and our mortgage, and then the council taxes and mortgage, all of that. It helped me because I'd come from the UK where you get paid. The number is so little, but the number is not just little for our roles, by the way. Like I know people that start off in finance, people that start off in other business roles, and like everyone in London gets paid less than other cities I've lived in. And I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we're always considered the most livable city because we pay a high salary and we have a lot of culture and art that's really affordable. So like Andrew Carnegie was from there, and Andy Warhol, we have amazing museums and libraries and all that stuff. And so I was shocked when I came here, just like Dana said, that I was like, holy heck. And then I was given a PA title. So I was like, okay, I'll be doing private stuff. And I wasn't. It was not private stuff. I think what it means here is what we would consider an administrative assistant. It's almost like between administrative, is it more like, do you guys feel like between administrative assistant and executive assistant, like you're a junior EA, or like you're on your way, or you're like heightened administrative assistant? Like administrative assistant feels too secretarial, so they won't give you that title. They'll give you the next one up or something. But I feel like that needs to just be wiped out. Like unless you're doing private stuff, just take it out. It's silly. And I've been a private. I am right now. And sorry, I got a text from my client. I am a private personal household assistant to high net worth individuals. And so that's where that title makes sense to me. And it is very weird. God, there's just so many things that are funny about this subject. And I think it's so very interesting. I love everyone's point of view. And I feel like there's on one page, we all have different insights, and in other ways we have the same insights, but I love that we're talking about it. I also love that, like, it's not really a disgruntled conversation. I think it's an empowering conversation to say, you know, with this communication, with this, we are supporting you to get that backbone. Like I said to Dana, like bring me in, but I do it in a way where, like, I just did a talk I'm going to do corporate training for one of the biggest companies in the world, to be honest. And it's coming up. I'm having a call with them right after this. And when I explained to them the ROI, they'd never considered training their assistants. They have hundreds of them. The ROI they get from training an assistant and giving them respect, and how little you have to put in to get so much. They were fighting. They were like jumping over themselves to be like, how do we sign up? How do we get you in here? How can we? And I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, that was easy. But because we just really hadn't considered it. So sadly, we just have this big education to do. And it all starts with us all just completely communicating it, and maybe not going to our executives or our L&D or HR or whoever, and being already on that back foot, as like Laura described, like reading that post where it was like, oh no, he didn't. But it's more like, okay, this is an opportunity to say, hey, and if you don't feel like you have that voice, bring in someone with that voice. Someone that has that voice where people just want to do what they say, even if they're a good or bad leader, that charismatic leader, and just voice has so much to do with it, just finding that and then being able to take that in. But as I think somebody in here said, I do find that getting that salary change happens much easier when you change roles.
Yeah, Emily said that. Yeah, and I just wanted Jessica a fairly lengthy comment in, but I think it's really important to just read it out, particularly for Hen, before we look to wrap up. So, in some of my experiences of registering with recruiters, you need to have had a job title previously held to demonstrate competency and the level of experience. For example, EA to the CEO, or a mention of supporting at C-suite level. This C-suite stuff confuses the hell out of me, I've got to say. That's usually the first foot in the door. Next is seeing you have already been working in a specific or similar environment, so the industry, for example, finance, investment roles, etc. And if you don't necessarily have experience, then 9 times out of 10, you become not suited to the role, regardless of your year's experience and your title. You might then come across a fellow assistant at a networking event, or seeing LinkedIn titles where a fellow assistant may have a very senior title in a well-known company with what looks like lesser experience. She's also found previously that there is significant salary difference between a PA and EA title role, regardless of often involving the same duties and responsibilities. There's quite a lot in there, but I think
I did read it. I think there's a lot, and if my cats are fighting next to me, so I'm sorry if they're growling. I think usually just when I'm on a webinar, so I'm really delighted about it. I have tried to stop them, but I think it's really difficult. Should we do it bit by bit? Is that okay? So that I make sure that I go through it. So the first part is about your job title in respect to it being EA to CEO, COO, etc. Is that right? And then not getting the opportunity if you don't have that, yeah?
Yeah, so I think that's how I've sort of read it. Yeah.
I think that's a very, very difficult one, because that isn't always the case. It can be your experience that it might be, but it isn't necessarily always the case. And I think this varies greatly between recruiter to recruiter. So I think it's worth choosing, as Lauren said earlier, choosing your recruiter wisely, and one that works in your sector specifically, so knows what they're talking about. Sometimes recruiters get roles in and it's not necessarily their area of expertise, so they might not be able to advise really well about that. So I do understand the frustration. I think that it is always worth, if you're an assistant and you want to move into those kind of roles and you're not finding that the door is being opened, you've got to start networking and looking at other people and being proactive before you go and talk to a recruiter. It is important to distinguish the fact, recruiters are working, as everybody knows, I'm sure, working for the client. You have to just pick the ones with the right kind of jobs and make the opportunities for yourself. Some people that walks almost seamlessly straight into a job like that with almost very little, sort of experience. It happens because of who they're talking to and who they're networking with. And I know that it feels like that might be uncomfortable for me to say that in one sense, but I hope that it's more empowering in that to start to build your network. And that's why what Laura and Hannah and Lauren do that's so clever and works so well for people is to allow people to share ideas and views about how they can do that. Because recruiters some are fantastic, some not so good. Some of us are always trying to learn more, and that can block your progress, whether it's salary, whether it's job title, whether it's opportunity. And I know that that's difficult. It's something I hear about, from people a lot. I'm sorry.
I keep thinking it's my baby, and then I realise I'm on mute and it's coming from there.
I'm
Brilliant.
Just going to stand up and make them go away, if I can, nicely.
It's home life, isn't it? Jessica, hopefully that helps. I think I
was just going to add to that. Just don't worry about other people as well. Only worry about the people that you like and admire. Don't worry, how did that person get there? What Hen said about networking is really important, but I think Michelle Bowditch at Door 21A, I think that's what she means when she says stay in your lane. I was trying to figure out what she meant in that, because she always says it, but hadn't explained it because it's kind of her thing. She's obviously, people that followed her before I knew. And I think it's more like, look at the people, because I went from an office manager to an EA to a private household PA for a high net worth individual. And, but if you look at what I did as an office manager, it was much bigger than what someone would consider an office manager. So just talking to people like us, or talking to people that and meet at these networking events, as Hen said, that you're like, they get it. They're someone I want to ask how they got there. Talk to them, but don't worry about the one-offs. And to be honest, they just knew somebody and said, hey, do you want to be my PA? It was like a friend's daughter or something. That's what a lot of that times happens. And there's no fault in that either. If you're one of those people that got your job that way, more power to you. Connection is everything. So just try not to put your blinders up when you see that kind of stuff. And
I think we spend so much time, particularly as women, I think, comparing ourselves to other people, and it can really ruin you. It can really ruin your day, or ruin your outlook on a job, or make you feel devalued. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind at all times, is actually focus on you and what you want to achieve. And like Lauren says, try and find the people that inspire you, not the people that make you feel worse, make you shit about it, because they're not the people that you want to surround yourself with. You want to surround yourself with the people that will help pull you up when you're feeling a bit down, and actually the ones that you want to run to and surround yourself with, because they give you that fire in your belly. They make you feel passionate about what you're doing. I think we may leave it there if everybody's okay to, unless there's any other comments or questions. And I think what I'd really like to put out there is perhaps we do another one of these in a few weeks, and we pick up, funny enough, Lauren, when you picked up on training, I was going to say there's a huge conversation to be had here on training. I think in both office management and assistant roles, the whole, administrative profession as a whole. Lauren talked about it with Hen on your podcast. I talked about it with Hen on the podcast as well. We touched on it. And I think there's a bigger topic there to be had about the lack of support and training from within companies and for the profession as a whole, that we could probably talk for an hour on as well. So has anyone got any other comments or questions that they want us to cover off before we do close? I think then we will wrap it up there. That's been really, really wonderful. Yeah, definitely. As Lauren's just said, reach out to any of us if you've got any questions. I believe everybody's details are in the webinar description anyway, so hopefully you've got a copy of that. But link up with us, follow us on Instagram. We all follow each other, so you should be able to find us, but message me if not. Lauren's put her email address there anyway. So yeah, so hopefully you found that helpful, and we'll put some more out there soon. And have a lovely weekend, everybody, in the sunshine. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon. And thank you so much, Laura, Hen and Lauren. I'll see you later soon.
Thank you. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Bye, the Laminator.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.